I knew something was wrong the moment I turned the key. My house had always greeted me with silence, but this was different. It felt like someone had paused a breath inside my living room. My name is Marilyn Carter, 62 years old, retired teacher, and the kind of woman who notices tiny things, things most people overlook. That day, I noticed everything. The rug near the door was shifted half an inch to the left, not dramatically, just enough that my foot caught the edge when it shouldn't have. I stopped in the doorway, one hand still on the knob, and let my eyes travel slowly across the space I had occupied for 23 years. The sofa pillow, the one with the embroidered hummingbird, was upside down. The bird was flying into the cushion instead of toward the window. I always kept it facing the light. Always. On the kitchen counter, a glass sat alone near the sink. Clear glass, lipstick stain on the rim. A soft coral shade I would never wear. I don't do coral. I do deep burgundy or nothing at all. And then there was the air. Soft, sugary, floral in a way that made me think of department store perfume counters and women who still believed men changed. It wasn't my scent. I wore something woodsy, something that made people think of autumn and good books. This was spring. This was youth. This was wrong. I set my purse down gently on the entry table and moved through the house like I was walking through a museum after hours, quiet, careful, observant. Every room whispered something I couldn't quite name yet. The bathroom hand towel was damp. I hadn't showered that morning. The bedroom closet door was cracked open when I always kept it closed. One of my scarves, a silk one I only wore to church, was draped over the chair instead of hanging in its designated spot. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table. I didn't drink it. I just held it, letting the condensation dampen my palm while my mind turned over the evidence like pages in a book I didn't want to finish. The front door opened. Dennis. My husband of 34 years walked in with a smile too wide for a Tuesday evening. His teeth were bright, his eyes were bright. Even his footsteps sounded lighter than usual, like he'd been laughing recently and hadn't quite shaken it off yet. "Mari!" He said my name the way people do when they're surprised to see you, even though he knew I'd be home. He always knew my schedule. He used to say that was love, knowing where your person would be, when they'd be there, and how they'd look when you found them. "Hey, sweetheart." I stood, smiled back, and let him kiss my cheek. His lips were warm, his cologne was faint, but underneath it, underneath everything was that same floral perfume, the young kind, the kind that clung to shirt collars and seat cushions. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice as smooth and untroubled as it had been every evening for 3 decades. "Good, good. Busy, you know? Clients, paperwork, the usual." Dennis set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. He moved toward the fridge, grabbed a beer, twisted the cap off with practiced ease. "What about you? You get any rest?" "I did." I watched him take a long drink, his throat working as he swallowed. "Took a little drive, ran some errands, came back and noticed a few things." He paused, just for a second. Just long enough for a woman who taught high school English for 30 years to catch the hesitation. The micro-expression, the flicker of something that wasn't quite fear, but close. "Yeah?" He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Like what?" I gestured vaguely. "Oh, just the house. It feels different, like someone rearranged the air." He laughed. Actually laughed. A short, clip sound that didn't match the humor he was trying to project. "You're poetic today, Mari. Must be all that reading you do." I smiled. Didn't argue. Didn't push. A woman my age learns more from silence than confrontation. He moved past me into the living room, flipped on the television, and settled in his recliner like he owned not just the chair, but the entire illusion of normalcy he was projecting. I stayed in the kitchen, washing the coral-stained glass by hand, even though we had a dishwasher. I scrubbed it until the lipstick was gone, until the glass was clear again. But clarity doesn't erase evidence. It just makes it easier to see. That night, I lay in bed beside Dennis and listened to him breathe. Deep, even breaths. The kind that come easy to people who don't carry guilt. Or maybe to people who've carried it so long it no longer weighs them down. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I replayed the day in my mind. The shifted rug, the upside-down pillow, the damp towel, the perfume that didn't belong to me but had somehow claimed space in my home. And Dennis, my husband, my partner, the man who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms, laughing too loud, smiling too much, smelling like someone else's hope. The next morning, I stood at the mailbox, sorting through bills and catalogs, when Miss Grable appeared beside me. She was 75, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door since before Dennis and I moved in. She wore a floral housecoat and slippers shaped like bunnies. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf, and her eyes, those pale blue eyes that had seen 7 decades of human foolishness, met mine with a knowing sadness. "Marilyn," she said, softly, touching my wrist with fingers that felt like tissue paper over bone. "Can I speak with you just for a moment?" I nodded, closing the mailbox and turning toward her fully. Ms. Grable glanced back at her house, then at mine, then leaned in close. "I don't like to interfere, baby. You know I don't. But do you know that Dennis isn't alone when you're out?" The air between us stilled. "What do you mean?" My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes before earthquakes. "I hear voices, women's voices, laughing, music playing, and I've seen women come and go, more than once, always when your car isn't in the driveway." Her eyes apologized before her mouth did. "I'm sorry, honey. I thought you should know." I didn't cry, didn't gasp, didn't crumble into the kind of theatrics people expect from women who've just had their suspicions confirmed. Instead, I squeezed her hand gently and said, "Thank you, Miss Grable. Thank you for telling me." She nodded, relieved, and shuffled back toward her house. I watched her go, then walked back inside my own home, the one that breathed wrong, the one that smelled like someone else, the one that had stopped being mine without my permission. I stood in the living room for a long time, my purse still on my shoulder, the mail still clutched in my hand. And then I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Dennis. Not yet. Not until I knew everything. Not until I had gathered every scrap of truth he thought he'd hidden from me. So I set a trap. I went upstairs, pulled out a small suitcase from the closet, and began packing. I did it loudly, made sure every zipper, every drawer, every footstep echoed through the house. When Dennis came home that evening, the suitcase sat prominently by the door, a beacon of my supposed plans. "Going somewhere?" he asked, eyeing the luggage with what I can only describe as poorly concealed relief. "Chattanooga," I said, brightly, folding a sweater and placing it inside. "My brother called. He's been feeling lonely since Linda passed, and I thought I'd spend a few days with him, keep him company." Dennis's face shifted, softened. He walked over and put his hands on my shoulders, his touch gentle, his expression tender. "That's really kind of you, Mary. He'll appreciate it." I thought so too. I zipped the suitcase shut and smiled up at him. "I'll leave tomorrow morning. Should be back in 3 or 4 days." "Take your time," Dennis said, and I swear I saw it just for a fraction of a second, the spark of anticipation in his eyes, the wheels turning, the plans forming. That night I kissed his cheek, told him I loved him, and went to bed early. He stayed up late, his phone glowing in the dark of the living room. I heard the soft tap of his fingers on the screen, texting, planning, believing he'd won. But he forgot one thing. I was still in the game, and I'd been playing longer than he realized. The next morning, I loaded my suitcase into the car, waved goodbye to Dennis as he stood on the porch with his coffee, and drove away. I made it to the end of the street, turned the corner, and kept going. Past the grocery store, past the library, all the way to the edge of town. Then I turned around. I parked my car 3 streets over, tucked behind a row of hedges where no one would notice it unless they were looking. I walked back toward my house on foot, staying close to fences and trees, moving like a shadow in my own neighborhood. By the time I reached the corner of my street, the sun was beginning its slow descent. Golden light stretched long across the pavement. My house stood quiet, waiting. I found a spot behind Ms. Grable's garden shed, hidden but with a clear view of my front door. And I waited too. 10 minutes passed. Then Dennis appeared. He stepped out onto the porch, looked left, looked right, then pulled out his phone. He made a call, short, quick. Then he went back inside, leaving the front door slightly ajar. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then they came. 3 women. They arrived in 2 cars, pulling into my driveway with the ease of people who'd done this before. The first one out was tall, blonde, mid-30s maybe, wearing jeans that looked painted on and a leather jacket that caught the last light of the sun. She laughed as she stepped out, a bright, careless sound that carried across the yard like wind chimes. The second woman was shorter, darker hair, dressed in a way that said she'd come straight from an office. Pencil skirt, heels, a blazer she was already shrugging off as she walked toward the house. The third one made my stomach turn. She was young, maybe 25. Long red hair, freckles across her nose, and she was carrying an overnight bag. They didn't knock. Dennis opened the door before they reached it, grinning like a man who just won something he didn't deserve. He hugged the blonde first, long and familiar, then the brunette, his hand lingering on her waist. The redhead kissed his cheek and he laughed, actually laughed, as he ushered them all inside. My house swallowed them whole. I stayed behind the shed, my knees pressed into the dirt, my hands gripping the wooden slats so hard I felt splinters bite into my palms. I wanted to scream, wanted to storm across the yard and tear the door off its hinges and demand answers I already knew. But I didn't, because screaming doesn't win wars. Strategy does. I pulled out my phone, set it to record, and crept closer. Close enough to hear, close enough to see through the living room window where the curtains hadn't been fully drawn. Inside, the blonde was already pouring wine, from my cabinet into my glasses. She raised hers in a toast, and the others followed. "To freedom," she said, her voice muffled but clear enough. "To freedom," the others echoed. Dennis clinked his glass against theirs, his smile wide and shameless. I zoomed in with my phone camera, capturing every face, every gesture, every betrayal framed in the soft glow of my living room lamps. The redhead wandered toward the hallway, disappearing from view. A moment later, she returned wearing something I recognized immediately. My robe, the blue silk one I wore on lazy Sunday mornings. She twirled in it, laughing, and said something I couldn't quite hear, but Dennis's response was loud enough. Comfortable, right? She has good taste, I'll give her that. They all laughed. I stopped recording. Not because I'd seen enough, but because if I watched one more second, I'd do something I couldn't take back. I returned to my hiding spot behind the shed and sat down in the dirt, my back against the wood, my hands clutched in both hands. The sky was darkening now, the kind of deep blue that comes just before full night. Lights flickered on inside my house. Music started playing, something upbeat, something meant for dancing. Miss Grable's back door creaked open. She stepped out onto her porch, spotted me immediately, and hurried over. "Marilyn!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here? I thought you left." "I did," I said quietly. "And then I came back." She crouched down beside me, her old knees popping in protest. She didn't ask why. She just sat there with me in the dark, both of us watching my house like it was a stage, and we were the audience to a tragedy we couldn't stop. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Miss Grable sighed. "Months, honey, maybe longer. I didn't know how to tell you, didn't know if I should. But when I saw you this morning, I couldn't let it go on without you knowing." "Thank you," I said again. And I meant it. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of laughter and music drifting through the walls of my home. Then Miss Grable stood, her joints protesting again, and said, "You come get me if you need anything, you hear? Anything at all." I nodded, and she disappeared back inside her house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my evidence. The hours crawled by. The lights stayed on. The music eventually stopped. Voices grew softer, then quieter, then silent. By midnight, I assumed they'd all gone to bed. I waited another hour. Then at 1:42 a.m., I saw movement through the window. Dennis, alone, walking through the living room toward the back of the house. Toward my study. I stood slowly, my muscles stiff from sitting so long in the cold. I crept around the side of the house, staying low, staying quiet. The back door had a spare key hidden under a decorative rock, a key Dennis didn't know I knew about because I'd put it there years ago for emergencies. This qualified. I unlocked the door as silently as I could, slipped inside, and eased it shut behind me. The house was dark, except for a faint glow coming from the hallway. I followed it, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. The study door was cracked open. Light spilled through the gap. I pressed myself against the wall and peered inside. Dennis was at my desk. My desk. He had opened the bottom drawer, the one I kept locked, the one where I stored all my important documents, and was pulling out papers. Lots of papers. He spread them across the desk surface, his movements quick and practiced, like he'd done this before. I could see some of the pages from where I stood. Loan applications, credit card statements, mortgage refinance documents, and my signature. My signature on every single one, except I hadn't signed them. My signature looked perfect, too perfect. Every loop of the M in Maryland, every slant of the C in Carter, it was all there, precise and convincing. But I knew my own handwriting better than anyone. I knew the slight hesitation I always had before signing legal documents, the way my hand trembled just a little, leaving a microscopic wobble in the tail of the Y. These signatures had no wobble. They were copies, forgeries. Expertly done, but forgeries nonetheless. I pulled my phone from my pocket, set it to record again, and angled the camera through the crack in the door. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't catch. I was beyond shock now, beyond heartbreak. I was in the cold, clear space where betrayal turns into evidence. Dennis shuffled through the papers, organizing them into neat stacks. Then he pulled out his own phone and made a call. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning, but whoever was on the other end picked up immediately. "It's me," Dennis said, his voice low. "Yeah, I've got everything. The refinance went through last week. She doesn't know." No, she signed off on it. Well, she thinks she did." He laughed, actually laughed, a quiet, satisfied sound that made my skin crawl. I zoomed in on the documents spread across the desk, capturing every page, every signature, every damning piece of evidence. Dennis continued talking. "The Nashville place is ready to go. Move-in is next month. Yeah, she'll be gone by then. I'll file the paperwork, say she's unstable, say she's been mismanaging funds. Dementia, maybe. The lawyers think it'll hold up." My breath stopped. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was erasing me, preparing to paint me as incompetent, unreliable, mentally unfit. He was building a legal case to justify taking everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, everything I'd earned in 34 years of marriage. And he was doing it with the kind of calm efficiency that told me this wasn't improvised. This was planned, calculated, rehearsed. The door behind Dennis opened. The brunette, the one in the pencil skirt, stepped inside carrying a leather binder. She set it on the desk beside the papers and flipped it open. "These are the transfer forms. Once we process these tomorrow, the funds will move from her retirement account into the holding account. She won't see it until the statements come in, and by then we'll already be 3 steps ahead." Dennis nodded. "How much?" "Enough to cover the apartment deposit, first 3 months' rent, and the initial setup for the business." She tapped a page in the binder. "After that, we drain the rest through the credit extensions. By the time anyone realizes what happened, it'll look like she authorized everything." "And if she tries to fight it?" The woman smiled. Not a kind smile, a predator's smile. "She won't. Not once the medical reports surface. We've already got the documentation showing she's been forgetful, the bank statements with irregular purchases, the testimony from concerned friends who've noticed changes." Dennis leaned back in the chair, satisfied. "You're good at this," she said. "I know. I captured every word, every gesture, every single piece of the conspiracy unfolding in my own home, at my own desk, with my own husband at the center of it all." The woman left the room, taking the binder with her. Dennis stayed behind, staring at the papers like they were treasure maps. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document. This one was different. It was a typed statement, formatted like an official report. I couldn't read the full text from where I stood, but I could see the header clearly enough. "Statement of concern regarding Marilyn Carter." Dennis read through it slowly, his lips moving slightly as he reviewed the words. Then he pulled out a pen and signed his name at the bottom. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, cracks can be repaired, but it shifted nonetheless, realigned itself into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous than love ever was. I backed away from the door silently, retracing my steps through the dark hallway and back toward the kitchen. I slipped out the back door, locked it behind me, and returned to my hiding spot behind Miss Grable's shed. The night was colder now, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you realize that warmth was an illusion all along. I sat down in the dirt again and reviewed the footage on my phone. Every second of it was clear, every word was audible, every crime was documented. At 3:27 a.m., I texted Miss Grable. "You were right." Her response came almost immediately. "I'm already writing a statement." I didn't respond, didn't need to. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and began typing. Not a diary entry, not a letter, a list. A list of every document Dennis had touched, every signature he had forged, every woman who'd walked through my door, every word he had said on the phone, every piece of evidence I now had that would dismantle the life he thought he was building on top of mine.
By the time the sun started to rise, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gold, I had a plan. Not a revenge fantasy, not an emotional outburst, a plan. Cold, surgical, legal. The kind of plan that doesn't just expose a man, it dismantles him. I stood, brushed the dirt from my pants, and walked back to my car. My knees ached, my back was stiff, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years.
I drove straight to the police station. Detective Ross was working the early shift. I knew him from church, from neighborhood watch meetings, from the kind of small-town interactions that make you think you know someone. I walked into the station at 6:14 a.m., set my phone on his desk, and said 6 words. I need to report a crime. He looked up from his coffee, his expression neutral but attentive. What kind of crime, Mrs. Carter? Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I unlocked my phone and handed it to him, and I have proof. Ross took the phone, pressed play on the first video, and watched in silence. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened slightly. He watched the second video, then the third, then the audio recordings. When he finished, he set the phone down carefully and looked at me with the kind of respect usually reserved for people who've survived wars. How long have you known? He asked. 2 days, I said. I suspected longer, but I only confirmed it 2 days ago. He nodded slowly. And you documented everything before coming here? I'm a retired teacher, detective. I know the value of evidence. A faint smile crossed his face. You built a solid case before walking in here, Mrs. Carter. Most people don't do that. Most people come in emotional, disorganized, without proof. I'm not most people. He picked up a pen and started writing. I'm going to need copies of everything, the videos, the audio, any physical documents you can access. I'll also need to verify the signatures on those financial documents. Do you have access to your bank statements? I do. Good. We'll need those too. He paused, looked up at me with those serious cop eyes. Mrs. Carter, I have to ask, do you want him arrested at home, or would you prefer we pick him up somewhere else? I didn't hesitate. Home, I said. Let the truth meet him where he betrayed it. Ross nodded. We'll coordinate with financial crimes and get a warrant. It'll take a few hours, maybe until late afternoon. Can you stay somewhere safe until then? I'll stay with Miss Grable, my neighbor. She's been helping me. Good. Ross stood and extended his hand. We'll take care of this, Mrs. Carter. I promise you that. I shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the certainty in his words. Then I turned and walked out of the station back into the early morning light. The air smelled like rain, like change, like the first breath you take after holding it too long. I drove back to my neighborhood, parked in Miss Grable's driveway, and knocked on her door. She opened it immediately, still in her housecoat, her eyes filled with questions. It's done, I told her. The police are coming. She ushered me inside, made tea, and sat with me at her kitchen table while we waited. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Some moments exist beyond words. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the day warmed, and then at 4:37 p.m., 3 unmarked police cars pulled onto my street. Detective Ross knocked on my door. Dennis opened it, still smiling, still oblivious, and the world tilted. The moment Dennis saw Detective Ross, his smile faltered, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the quick mental scramble to assess the situation, to figure out what had gone wrong, to prepare whatever lie would serve him best. But Ross didn't give him time to think. Dennis Carter. Ross's voice was calm, professional, the kind of tone that doesn't ask questions so much as state facts. Yes. Dennis glanced past Ross toward the other officers fanning out across the front yard. Is something wrong, Detective? I need you to step outside, Mr. Carter. We have some questions regarding financial documents bearing your wife's signature. The color drained from Dennis's face. Not dramatically, he was too practiced at deception for that, but I saw it. The slight pallor, the tightening around his mouth, the way his hand gripped the door frame just a little harder than necessary. "I don't understand," Dennis said, his voice steady but quieter now. "What documents?" "We can discuss that at the station," Ross gestured toward the driveway. "Please step outside, Mr. Carter." He hesitated. His eyes darted toward the interior of the house, where I knew the two women were still inside, probably still asleep or just waking up. Then he stepped onto the porch, closing the door carefully behind him. That's when he saw me. I was standing at the edge of Miss Grable's yard, arms crossed, watching. Our eyes met across the distance, and something in his expression crumbled. Not guilt, not shame, realization. "Marilyn," his voice cracked on my name. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you went to Chattanooga." "I came back," I said simply. "When?" "Long enough ago," I replied. His face shifted through a dozen emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, denial, anger, and finally, fear. Ross moved between us, his body language making it clear that this conversation was over. "Mr. Carter, we have a warrant to search your home and seize any financial documents related to Marilyn Carter. We also need you to come with us to answer some questions." "Search warrant? For what?" "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's what we're here to determine." Ross nodded toward one of the other officers, who approached with handcuffs. Wait, this is a mistake. Whatever Marilyn told you, she's confused. She's been forgetful lately, mixing things up. I've been worried about her, actually. I was planning to talk to her doctor about..." "Save it for the station." The officer moved forward, and Dennis finally seemed to understand that this wasn't a conversation he could talk his way out of. His shoulders slumped, his hands dropped, and when the cuffs clipped around his wrists, he looked at me again with something that might have been desperation. "Mary, please, whatever you think happened..." "I don't think anything, Dennis," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I know. I saw. I recorded. And now everyone else knows too." The front door opened behind him. The blonde stepped out, wrapped in a sheet, her hair wild from sleep. She froze when she saw the police cars, the officers, Dennis in handcuffs. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. Ross turned toward her. "And you are?" She stopped, realizing suddenly that whatever she said next would matter a lot. "I'm a friend. A friend who stays overnight while Mr. Carter's wife is out of town." Ross's tone was neutral, but the implication was clear. The woman's eyes flicked toward Dennis, then toward me, then back to Ross. "I want a lawyer." "That's your right, but first I need your identification and a statement about why you're here." The brunette appeared in the doorway next, fully dressed this time, her expression sharp and calculating. She assessed the situation quickly, her gaze landing on me for just a moment before returning to Ross. "I'm not saying anything without legal counsel," she announced. Ross nodded. "That's fine. You're all going to have plenty of time to speak with lawyers. Right now, I need everyone to step outside so my team can execute the search warrant." 2 more officers moved past them into the house. Dennis was led toward one of the unmarked cars. The blonde and brunette were asked to wait on the lawn while officers took their statements. And through it all, I stood there watching, not gloating, not crying, just watching the machinery of justice do what I'd set in motion. Miss Grable appeared beside me, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently. "You did the right thing, honey," she whispered. "I know," I said. The redhead was the last to emerge. She looked younger in the morning light, scared and confused. She wasn't wrapped in a sheet or dressed for a quick exit.
She was wearing my robe still, the blue silk one that had been a gift from my mother before she passed. She saw me looking at her and had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he was married. He said you were separated." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She was young and foolish and probably believed every lie Dennis had fed her. But that didn't absolve her of being in my house, in my robe, in my life. Ross approached me with a clipboard. "Mrs. Carter, we're going to need you to come down to the station as well. Not under arrest," he added quickly, seeing my expression, "just to give a formal statement and verify the documents we're seizing." "Of course," I said. He glanced toward the house. We found quite a bit inside. Financial records, forged documents, a laptop with some interesting files. "Your case is strong, Mrs. Carter, very strong." "Thank you, Detective." He nodded and walked back toward the house. Miss Grable squeezed my hand again. "You need me to come with you?" she asked. "No," I said, "but thank you for everything. You call me when you're done, you hear? I'll make dinner. You shouldn't be alone tonight." I hugged her, a long, tight hug that said everything words couldn't. Then I walked to my car, drove to the police station, and spent the next 4 hours giving my statement. I showed them everything. The videos, the audio recordings, the timeline of events, the discrepancies in the signatures. I answered every question calmly, clearly, without emotion or embellishment. At one point, Ross brought in a documents examiner who compared my real signature to the forged ones. She took less than 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew. These are excellent forgeries, but they're definitely not authentic. The pressure points are wrong, the flow is too consistent, and there are micro-indicators of tracing. Someone spent a lot of time getting these right, but they're not the original signatory's work.
Ross nodded and added her analysis to the growing file. By the time I left the station, it was nearly 9 o'clock. The sun had set, the air was cool, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I called Miss Grable from the parking lot. "How'd it go, honey?" she asked. "It went well," I said. "They have everything they need." "Good. Now you come over here and eat something. I made pot roast." I smiled despite everything. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When I arrived at Miss Grable's house, she had the table set, the food warm, and a glass of red wine waiting for me. We ate in comfortable silence, and when we were done, she walked me to her front porch. "You're stronger than you know, Marilyn Carter," she said. "I learned from watching you survive 75 years of this world," I replied. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and sent me home. But when I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time before going inside. The house was dark, empty. Police tape stretched across the front door, a temporary barrier while they processed evidence. I used the back entrance instead. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The house was breathing differently. Not wrong anymore, just different. Like it was waiting to remember what normal felt like. I walked through each room slowly, turning on lights as I went. The living room, where the women had drunk my wine. The kitchen, where they'd laughed at my expense. The study, where Dennis had shuffled through forged documents like a man playing solitaire with my life. I stood in the study doorway and looked at my desk. The papers were gone now, seized by police, but the drawer was still open, the one I'd kept locked, the one Dennis had violated. I closed it, locked it, put the key back in its hiding place. Then I walked upstairs to the bedroom. Our bedroom. The bed was unmade. The sheets smelled of perfume and betrayal. I stripped them immediately,
carried them downstairs and threw them in the washing machine. I set the temperature to hot, added extra detergent, and let the machine do what I couldn't: wash away the stain of what had happened here. While the washer ran, I sat at the kitchen table with the cup of tea and finally let myself feel. Not anger, not yet. That would come later, in waves, when I least expected it. But right now, in the quiet of my empty house, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Relief that I trusted my instincts. Relief that I hadn't confronted Dennis prematurely. Relief that I built a case instead of just throwing accusations. Relief that the truth was no longer a secret I carried alone. My phone buzzed, a text from Detective Ross. Dennis Carter has been formally charged with identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Bail hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back a single word. Thank you. I didn't sleep much that night either. But this time, it wasn't because of suspicion or fear. It was because my mind was processing everything, rewinding, replaying, recontextualizing 34 years of marriage in light of what I now knew. Had there been signs earlier? Had I missed them? Or had Dennis always been this person, just better at hiding it until he thought he'd found the perfect opportunity? I didn't have answers. Maybe I never would. But I had something more important than answers. I had my name, my dignity, my future. And nobody, not Dennis, not his accomplices, not anyone could take those from me again.
The bail hearing was at 10 a.m. I didn't plan to attend. Ross had told me it wasn't necessary, that victims often chose not to be present for these procedural matters. But when I woke that morning, dressed, and drank my coffee in the kitchen that finally felt like mine again, I realized something. I needed to be there. Not for Dennis, not to see him squirm or plead or play the victim, but for myself, to witness the official beginning of the consequences, to mark the moment when silence turned into accountability. So I drove to the courthouse, parked in the public lot, and walked through the metal detectors with my head held high. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, a judge who looked tired before the day had even really started. I sat in the back row, hands folded in my lap, and waited. Dennis was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His hair was uncombed. He looked smaller somehow, like the absence of his freedom had physically diminished him. His eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on me. He stared. I stared back. No expression, no emotion, just acknowledgement. You are here. I'm here. This is happening. The blonde and the brunette were brought in separately, each flanked by public defenders who looked like they were running on coffee and spite. The redhead wasn't present. Ross had told me she'd been released after questioning once they determined she had no knowledge of the financial crimes. She was just collateral damage, a prop in Dennis's theater of lies. The judge entered and everyone stood. The proceedings began with the efficiency of bureaucracy. Charges read, rights confirmed, lawyers speaking in the coded language of the legal system. When it came time for the prosecutor to speak, she was blunt. Your Honor, the defendant orchestrated a systematic scheme to defraud his wife of her life savings, retirement funds, and property. He forged her signature on multiple financial documents, conspired with 2 accomplices to launder funds, and was in the process of executing a plan to have her declared mentally incompetent when he was apprehended.
The financial damages exceed $200,000, and the psychological harm to the victim is incalculable. The state requests that bail be denied due to flight risk and the severity of the charges. Dennis's lawyer, a middle-aged man with a briefcase that had seen better days, stood and countered. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. He's a lifelong resident of this community with ties to family and business. He poses no flight risk. We ask that bail be set at a reasonable amount so that Mr. Carter can prepare his defense while maintaining his employment and... The judge held up a hand. Does Mr. Carter currently have employment? The lawyer hesitated. He was self-employed, Your Honor. Financial consulting. And are those clients aware he's been charged with fraud and forgery? Silence. The judge looked down at the documents in front of her, flipping through pages with the detached focus of someone who'd seen 1,000 cases just like this one. Bail is denied, she said flatly. Preliminary hearing is set for 3 weeks from today. Next case. The gavel came down. Dennis's face went pale. He turned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently, but the officers were already moving him toward the side door. As he passed my row, he looked at me again. This time, his expression was different, desperate, almost pleading. Mari, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, please, you have to know I never meant to hurt you. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I believed him? I didn't. That I forgave him? I couldn't. That I understood? I never would. So I just sat there, silent and still, and watched him disappear through the door. The blonde's bail was set at $50,000. The brunette's was set at $75,000, higher because of her direct involvement in the financial transfers. Both looked shaken as they were let out. I stayed seated until the courtroom cleared, then stood and walked out into the hallway where Detective Ross was waiting. You didn't have to come, he said gently. I know, but I needed to. He nodded, understanding. The district attorney wants to meet with you next week to go over the case in more detail. They're building toward trial, and they'll need your testimony. I'll be ready. I know you will. Ross smiled slightly. You're one of the most prepared witnesses I've ever worked with, Mrs. Carter. Most people fall apart when something like this happens, but you're like steel. Not steel, just a woman who's tired of being underestimated. He laughed softly. Well, Dennis certainly underestimated you. Yes, I said. He did. I left the courthouse and drove home, but instead of going inside, I sat in my driveway and called my brother in Chattanooga, the one I'd supposedly been visiting when all of this unfolded. Mari. His voice was warm and surprised. Everything okay? Not really, but it will be. I told him everything, the suspicions, the trap, the recordings, the arrest. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Jesus, Mari, he finally said. I'm so sorry. Do you need me to come down there? No, I'm okay. I just needed to hear your voice. You're stronger than all of us combined, you know that. I smiled. Despite everything. That's what everyone keeps telling me. Because it's true. He paused. Linda would have been proud of you, the way you handled this. My throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Thank you, I whispered. You call me anytime, you hear? Day or night. I mean it. I will. We said our goodbyes, and I sat in the car a little longer, watching my house. It looked the same as it always had. White siding, blue shutters, a garden that needed weeding, but it felt different now. It felt like mine. Over the next few weeks, my life became a series of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. I met with the district attorney twice, going over every detail of the case. I met with my bank to reverse the fraudulent transactions and freeze the accounts Dennis had accessed. I met with a locksmith to change every lock in the house. I met with a lawyer of my own to begin divorce proceedings. Each meeting felt like peeling away another layer of the life I thought I'd had, revealing the truth underneath. The truth wasn't pretty, but it was real. Miss Grable came over most evenings. We'd sit on the porch with glasses of wine and talk about everything and nothing. She told me stories about her late husband, about the time she'd had to be strong when she didn't feel strong at all. And I told her about the moments when I wanted to scream, to cry, to burn everything Dennis had touched. "But you didn't," she said one night. "You stayed focused. You stayed smart. And that's why you won." "I haven't won yet," I replied. "The trial's still coming." "Honey," Miss Grable said, patting my hand, "the moment you decided not to let him destroy you, that's when you won. Everything else is just paperwork." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like sunlight after weeks of rain. 3 weeks after the bail hearing, the preliminary hearing took place. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to abbreviated testimony, and ruled that there was sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Dennis looked worse than before, thinner, grayer, like jail was eating him from the inside out. Good, I thought. Let him feel a fraction of what he tried to do to me. The trial date was set for 2 months out. In the meantime, I focused on reclaiming my life. I cleaned out the closet Dennis had used, donating his clothes to charity. I redecorated the bedroom with new sheets, new curtains, new everything. I planted flowers in the garden, bright, defiant colors that refused to apologize for taking up space. I started taking long walks in the mornings, rediscovering my neighborhood from a different perspective. I joined a book club at the library. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I started to feel like myself again. Not the woman I'd been before all of this. That woman was gone, dissolved in the acid of betrayal. But a new version, a stronger version. A version who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than she deserved. One evening, about 6 weeks after the arrest, I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, professional attire, carrying a briefcase. "Mrs. Carter?" she called out. "Yes?" "I'm Rachel Simmons. I'm with the DA's office. I wanted to stop by and give you an update before the trial." I gestured to the chair beside me. "Please, sit." She settled into the seat, setting her briefcase at her feet. "I wanted you to know that Dennis's attorney approached us about a plea deal." My heart skipped. "And?" "We rejected it. The evidence is too strong, and frankly, what he did to you warrants a trial. But I thought you should know he's trying to avoid facing a jury." "He's always been good at avoiding consequences," I said quietly. Rachel nodded. "Well, this time, not. We're going to make sure he faces every single charge. And, Mrs. Carter, we're going to win." I looked at her, this woman I barely knew who was fighting on my behalf, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. "Thank you," I said, "for everything. You made this case easy. The evidence you gathered, the way you documented everything, it's prosecutor's dream. You did the hard work. I'm just finishing it." After she left, I sat on the porch until the stars came out, thinking about the journey from that first moment of suspicion to this moment of near resolution. It hadn't been easy. There were nights I'd cried myself to sleep, days when I'd questioned everything, moments when I wanted to give up, to pretend none of it had happened, to go back to the comfortable lie of my marriage. But I hadn't. And that, more than anything, is what I was proud of.
The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a navy blue suit that made me feel like armor. Miss Grable came with me, along with my brother who'd driven down from Chattanooga the night before. They sat on either side of me in the courtroom, silent pillars of support. Dennis was already seated at the defense table when I entered. He didn't look at me, not once. Not during jury selection, not during opening statements, not when the prosecutor presented photo after photo of the forged documents bearing my name. The trial lasted 4 days. 4 days of testimony, 4 days of expert witnesses explaining how signatures can be forged, how financial crimes are orchestrated, how conspiracies unfold. 4 days of watching Dennis's lawyer try desperately to poke holes in a case that was airtight. On the third day, I took the stand. Rachel Simmons walked me through everything, calmly, methodically. Every question was designed to paint a clear picture of who I was, what had happened, and how I'd responded. "Mrs. Carter," she said at one point, "when you first suspected your husband was being unfaithful, why didn't you confront him?" I looked directly at the jury. "Because I am a teacher. I spent 30 years teaching teenagers how to think critically, how to gather evidence before drawing conclusions. I knew that accusations without proof would lead nowhere. So I gathered proof. And when you discovered the financial fraud, how did you feel?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. Betrayed. Not just by the infidelity, but by the realization that someone I'd trusted with my entire life had been systematically destroying it. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was erasing me. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Dennis's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd misunderstood, that perhaps I'd signed the documents and forgotten, that maybe I'd been experiencing memory issues. I responded to each question with calm precision, citing dates, times, and specific details that made it clear my memory was flawless. "Mrs. Carter," the defense attorney said, his tone almost sympathetic, "isn't it possible that your husband was trying to help you? That he was managing finances you didn't fully understand?" "No," I said firmly, "because if he'd been trying to help me, he wouldn't have forged my signature, he wouldn't have hidden documents, he wouldn't have planned to have me declared incompetent. And he certainly wouldn't have had 3 women in my house while I was supposedly out of town." The jury looked at Dennis. Several of them frowned. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt lighter, like I'd finally spoken a truth that had been lodged in my chest for months. The brunette, the one who'd handled the financial transfers, also testified, though not by choice. She'd been offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and she took it. She explained the entire scheme in detail, how Dennis had approached her, how they'd planned the forgeries, how they'd intended to drain my accounts and disappear. "Why did you agree to help him?" Rachel asked. The woman shrugged. "He paid well, and he made it sound like his wife wouldn't even notice, like she was already checked out." "But she wasn't checked out, was she?" "No," the woman admitted, glancing at me briefly. "She definitely wasn't." On the 4th day, closing arguments were presented. Rachel stood before the jury and spoke with quiet intensity. Dennis Carter didn't just betray his wife's trust. He tried to steal her identity, her financial security, and her future. He forged her name dozens of times. He conspired with others to commit fraud, and he was preparing to have her declared mentally incompetent so he could continue his crimes without interference. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. And the evidence, all of it documented by Mrs. Carter herself, proves it beyond any reasonable doubt.
Dennis's lawyer tried to spin a narrative of miscommunication and misunderstanding, but it fell flat. The evidence was too strong. The testimony was too clear. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the count of identity theft, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On the count of forgery, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit financial crimes, guilty. Guilty, 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 guilty. Each word landed like a hammer, and with each one, I felt something inside me release. Not joy, not vindication, but just relief. The relief of knowing that the truth had been heard, believed, and validated. Dennis didn't react. He just sat there staring at the table in front of him as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following week. Sentencing day was quieter. Fewer people in the courtroom, less drama, just the necessary parties and the weight of consequences. The judge looked at Dennis with an expression that managed to be both stern and sad. "Mr. Carter, you violated the trust of the person who should have been able to trust you most. You committed crimes that were not only illegal, but deeply personal. You tried to erase your wife's autonomy, her financial security, and her dignity. The law takes these crimes seriously, and so do I." She sentenced him to 8 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Restitution was ordered in the full amount of the stolen funds, plus damages. Dennis was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs for the last time, and I walked out a free woman. Miss Grable hugged me on the courthouse steps. My brother took us all to lunch. We didn't talk about the trial. We talked about everything else, about recipes and travel plans and the new book club selection. When I finally returned home that evening, the sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across my lawn. I stood in the driveway for a moment, just looking at my house. It looked the same as it always had. White siding, blue shutters, a garden that was blooming now, full of color. But it felt different. It felt like it was finally breathing correctly again. I walked inside, set my purse on the entry table, and moved through each room slowly. The living room where I'd first noticed things were wrong, the kitchen where I'd seen the coral lipstick stain, the study where Dennis had rifled through my private papers. All of it was mine now. Fully, completely, undeniably mine. I ended up in the bedroom standing in front of the dresser where I'd kept my wedding ring in a small dish for the past several months. I picked it up, felt the weight of it, and thought about what it had symbolized. Love, commitment, partnership, forever. But some forevers end, and that's okay.
I walked to the window, opened it, and let the evening breeze flow through. Then I placed the ring back in the dish and whispered something I'd been holding on to for far too long. I saw everything, and I lost nothing that mattered. The house seemed to exhale with me. The air felt clearer, lighter, like we'd both been holding our breath and could finally let go. I made myself a cup of tea, took it out to the porch, and sat in the same chair where I'd planned my trap all those months ago. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Miss Grable's lights were on next door, and I could see her moving around in her kitchen. My phone buzzed, a text from Rachel Simmons. "You did it, Mrs. Carter. You should be proud." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for helping me finish what I started." Another text came through, this one from my brother. "Love you, sis. You're the strongest person I know." I responded with a heart emoji, something I rarely used, but that felt appropriate now. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue, I sat there thinking about everything I'd been through,
The betrayal, the fear, the anger, the strategy, the evidence, the trial, the verdict. All of it had led to this moment, this quiet, peaceful, ordinary moment on my porch with a cup of tea and a heart that was healing. I'd lost a husband, but I'd gained something far more valuable. Myself. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went for a run. Not a long one, just a short loop around the neighborhood, but with each step, I felt stronger, more present, more alive. When I returned home, sweaty and slightly out of breath, Miss Grable was outside watering her flowers. "Look at you," she called out, grinning, "running like a teenager." "I feel like one," I called back, and I meant it. I spent the rest of that day doing ordinary things: laundry, grocery shopping, calling a handyman to fix the squeaky hinge on the back door. All the small, mundane tasks that make up a life, but they felt different now. They felt like mine. Over the following weeks and months, I continued rebuilding. I took a part-time job at the local library, helping with literacy programs. I reconnected with old colleagues from my teaching days. I started painting, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. I even went on a date, just one, with a man I met at the book club. It didn't turn into anything serious, but it reminded me that my life wasn't over, that there were still chapters left to write. 1 year after the arrest, I stood in my living room and looked around at everything I'd changed. New furniture, new paint, new art on the walls. The house barely resembled the one Dennis had violated. But I could still remember that first night when I'd come home and sensed something was wrong, when the air had breathed differently, when every small detail had whispered that my life wasn't what I thought it was. I listened to those whispers, and I trusted myself. That, more than anything else, is what had saved me. Not the recordings, not the evidence, not even the trial. It was the simple, powerful act of believing my own instincts. I walked to the front door, opened it wide, and let the afternoon sunlight flood the entryway. The house seemed to sigh with contentment, its rooms filled with light and possibility. I whispered the words again, this time not as a statement of what I'd survived, but as a promise of what was to come. I saw everything, and I lost nothing that mattered. And as I stood there in the doorway of my home, my sanctuary, my refuge, my new beginning, I knew with absolute certainty that I was telling the truth. The house agreed with me, and for the first time in years, everything was exactly as it should be.